Welcome back. Now it is important for us to understand loops. Another logic that would help you to code better to solve some business problems in the market. So what is a loop? Let's understand that better. Loops are used where a condition is to be tested for a number of values or iterations. So you're creating a loop and you're executing certain things for a certain set of values. That's where the loop is used. So loops can be run on a list of values as well as where each iteration can test a condition for all values of that list. This is how the loops are executed. So if you notice, the first loop statement that you're going to learn is for loop. The for loop can be used to iterate over arrays, sets, tuples, strings, list, etc. I know some of the terms may be new to you. Don't worry about it. We are going to learn data structures in the upcoming sections and you'll be able to understand these statements. But all you have to remember now is these data structures can store multiple values. So to go through multiple values of those data structures, for loop can be used. And these are zero indexed loops. When I say zero indexed, it starts with the zero value. That means the first character or the first item in the loop is actually denoting to the value of zero. That is, when you say this particular zero value, that you are referring to the first item in that particular list. Check this out. The syntax when I write it, like for I in range of 10, print I plus 1. For values to start with 0, I plus 1 is required. Thus you're starting with 0 and then slowly you're indexing it and then you're printing I plus 1 as a result of it. As a part of for loop, we also have something called as nested for loops. These can be used for creation of two-dimensional arrays. When you have multiple dimensions within the same array, for each dimension, you may need to have a separate for loop. So it's more like for loop within for loop. For every first item, iterate all the second ones. That's what we call it as a nested one, isn't it? Just like the nested if-else condition that we discussed earlier, where we have an if condition within a broader if condition. Here we are talking about nested loops where you have a loop within another for loop. It's especially used when you have multi-dimensional arrays. Depending on the number of dimensions you will have number of for loops in a nested manner. Like for example, for I in range 11 and for j in range I, you're printing I and you're printing j. So in a way, step by step, you're printing things and in a cascaded manner. That's what we call it as a nested loop. So while we talk about loops, it is also important for us to understand certain functions associated with the loop. When I say len, it talks about the length. So this helps me to understand the length of the list that I am handling. Sometimes I may not know how many items are stored in the list. If I use this particular attribute, len, it helps me to identify the number of items in the list and accordingly I can write my for loop. From 0 till this particular length, you are going to run the loop kind of. And this really helps. When I use range, this is another function very similar to len. When I use range, it is helping me to create iterations of a desired sequence. Instead of going through the full number of items in the list, here I am saying that I will do it only for a certain range. Range means I am going to give the starting point and I am going to give the end point. So it is going to help me to just run the for loop only for these items given in the range between the starting and the ending point. So I hope you have understood what for loop can do for you. Now let's understand while loop. So for is for iterations, while is also for iterations in a list, but it's based on a different concept. So what I'm saying here is, when I say while, I'm going to use an expression. And basis that expression, till that expression is executed, I am going to execute certain set of statements. Unlike if statement, while keeps on executing the block in a loop until the condition is met. So for is about meeting a certain condition, you're executing certain items. Here, you're executing everything till a certain condition is met. The while loop executes at least once as the condition is true for the first time. That may not be the case with for also. But here you're executing it at least once because you execute the condition and then you execute the statements and then you check the condition. So this makes a difference. In case of a condition which can never be false, that is like infinite loop, Control C helps to stop the program execution. You may not face this situation in a real programming world because generally you are aware of when to stop the execution and the conditions for the while statement is very clear. But somewhere if you're stuck, then you may use Control C.